Привет, друзья! G'day guys, and welcome to another Soviet lens reviews video. It has been a while. I've been pretty busy moving house and generally just busy with life, but I'm here today because I wanted to share with you some recent photography I've done with my Soviet lenses in an architectural format, in particular a real estate format. So when I was moving out of my last house, I ended up deciding to take some photos of it because I wanted to rent it out. The real estate agent said, look, you can hire a photographer. It's just going to cost you a couple of $100. And of course, me with my Soviet lenses, I thought, well, you know what, why would I hire someone when I can see if I can just do it myself on some of my Soviet wide angles? But of course, that's not all there was to it. I have been recently sent this K&F Concept tripod, and so I thought that the real estate format would be a good opportunity to put this tripod through its paces as well. This one is the T254A8. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, but it's basically K&F's entry-level tripod, or one of the entry-level tripods. So we're going to be checking that out as well. Let's dive into it. Let's see which lenses can photograph real estate better. Is it the modern Nikon Zs, like the stock zoom that I've got on the Z50 here that I'm shooting on, or does the Mir-20N still hold up today? Let's find out. That's right, guys. Today we're taking a look at architectural photography and real estate photography with Soviet lenses. And you might be thinking, oh, well, you know what? What's the point? Why not just buy yourself a modern, wide angle lens without all of the aberrations and, make life easy for yourself? Well, I'm not about that. And I still think that the character of Soviet lenses and vintage lenses in general can actually add a lot to even very commercial photography these days, particularly when you kind of mix it in half and half. The other day I went and shot my old place and gave the photos to the real estate agent. But before I shot, I decided, okay, what lenses am I going to bring to this shoot? I of course picked my Nikon Z6, and I decided to just bring one lens because I knew I'd have the zoom capability of the Z50. I decided to bring the Mir-20N 20mm f3.5 made in the Arsenal plant. As you can see, the Arsenal plant logo back behind me there, in Soviet Ukraine back in the day in 1983, as you can tell from the first two digits of my lens's serial number right there. And it does have a kind of, it's basically a Nikon F mount. It's not quite the same, the Kiev bayonet mount, but yeah, I've got it mounted with my F to Z adapter. As well as this lens, I did take my Nikon Z50 with the Nikon 3.5 to 6.3, 16 to 50mm VR lens, which is of course in the DX format, what Nikon calls its crop format cameras. And this is the first time I've really taken the Z50 out to shoot with it. So I was pretty excited actually to see what it could do. So here you can see me setting up my tripod and how it was set up for the duration of the photography. But I think now that we've seen how the tripod's set up, let's dive a little bit more into how I found this tripod to use. So the Kent Faith tripod has a load capacity listed at 10 kilograms. I believe that once you're hitting that 10 kilogram mark though, it is starting to feel a little bit shaky because it is made of aluminium alloy. So it's not that super strong, super sturdy carbon fiber. It is aluminium. It's not unstable though. It's relatively stable. Outside of that, it has a total weight of 2 kilograms. So it's definitely not a travel tripod. You are going to find a lot of lighter tripods out there. It has 4 leg sections on each leg that can be extended. They are extended via a screw system. So, I'm not so much of a fan of the screw system. I prefer the lever system, but take your pick. Outside of that, it does have the center column as well, which can be extended. I think that's about, 70 centimeters or so. But the maximum working height of this tripod is 2.3 meters. So you're really never going to need a taller tripod than this if you pick one up. As well as that, the tripod head that comes with it, this is the BH20L. It is a ball head. I would call this very entry level. Look, it is a ball head. It does, rotate around in a 360 degree angle of rotation. You can tighten it. It is probably going to basically stay there, but I've used much nicer ball heads in my time. This is not the best one. And you can do transverse rotation, so you can just rotate it on the horizontal axis, if I can figure out how to do it. It's one of these knobs, there you go. So you can rotate the ball head on just the horizontal axis. That's always nice. And of course it has the Arca Swiss mount, which is, you know, it does the job. It's going to hold your whatever you decide to put on it. But yeah, aside from that, there's not really much else to talk about. It does have a few different leg settings. So it's got 3 settings for each leg as to how far out they extend angle-wise, which, I mean, even the leg setting kind of lever here, it feels pretty cheap, and there's a lot of mechanical slop in it. Yeah, and then even the bolts, I think they've gone and found bolts or screws for the tripod here that when you zoom into them, they say photo, which I'm going to be honest, it just feels a bit cheap. Like, and you see a screw that's got photo written on it. Like, yeah, we get it, guys, it's a tripod. Anyways, the only other thing is it does technically have a detachable monopod here. So I've never actually used this, but you know, I guess you get 2 for 1. You get your monopod, which is admittedly quite a long monopod that you can just screw back into the tripod. And look, that's a pretty nifty feature. Overall though, my impressions of it, would I recommend this tripod? I would say try and just save up a little bit more money and get a slightly nicer tripod. You know, K&F Concept, they do make some slightly nicer tripods. When I was talking to them, because they reached out to me, I said I would prefer having, you know, one of the more professional tripods to do a real, you know, professional review of it. But look, at the end of the day, if you are in the market for a cheap, entry-level, high-reach tripod, then you can pick this one up and, you know, use it occasionally, not use it too professionally, and particularly if you're in like a kind of static setting where you're not going to need to move it around too much because it is 2 kilos, then you know what? It's going to do the job. Well, that's enough about the tripod. Let's dive in now to some photos and check out how my Soviet lens, the Mir-20N, compared with the modern Nikon. Okay, here we are. Let's jump into some photos. First off, we've got one in the kitchen. Now, before we go through these, you are going to be seeing all of these photos in their delivered resolution, which was about 3.5 megapixels, approximately 2400 by 1600 pixels in size. And I just think this is a good comparison because, again, that's a format that I ended up delivering these photos in and that was requested. So, you know, we are going to be, I guess, handicapping the modern lenses in that way. But yeah, you can always tell what lens these photos were shot with up in the top right. So first up, the kitchen here, this is shot on the modern Nikon. And again, it's, you know, it's a pretty standard lens. It looks pretty sharp. You're not going to be seeing too many aberrations anywhere. It deals with the bright points of light quite nicely. And on the tripod, I was able to get it pretty stable. If I'm being super critical of myself, I think maybe the straight lines in the middle could use a degree or 2 of extra correction. But I think here the straight lines are looking pretty solid. As you can tell, it's a very neutral photo, and you could have told me that this was shot on the smartphone, I would believe you. Let's move over to the comparison shot. But this shot was shot on the Mir-20N, the MC Mir-20N. And immediately I think you can tell that it does have a little bit of a different character to it. So the Mir-20N that I have, it does have, as you can kind of see in the corners, a little bit of chromatic aberration and even a slight color shift in the corners. Now, all of the photos of the Mir are also cropped in a little bit to hide some vignetting. So yeah, you can see that here where the blue channel and the red channel is shifting away from each other, or are shifting away from each other at the edges of the frame. And then of course you've got these little points of flare up in the frame as well. But if you actually zoom out, I find this to have a much more neutral tone. I feel as though it's a more kind of whole, I don't know what I'd call it, but I guess a more unified scene, a more unified look that doesn't look quite as digital as the Z30 in the kitchen scene. So my preference is honestly probably the Z6 and the MC Mir-20N here. Let's stop off real quickly in the master bedroom though. This is again on the MC Mir-20N. And again, look, it's a blank room. You're not going to win any awards for this photo, but look, it does pretty well. And again, if you kind of ignore the slight color shift towards the edges of the frame there, which this lens has, I think that's definitely its weakest characteristic. Look, it's still picking up lots of details in the carpet, which could be a bad thing, but it is, you know, still quite high resolution in the areas of the frame that matter. A little bit of flaring up in the top there. It's a pretty solid lens. Now the Mir-20N, it does have a little bit of barrel distortion, as you can see. So it is kind of curving some of these lines a little bit, but I haven't actually corrected it much. And even though it is still curving them a little bit, for a 20mm full frame lens, particularly one made in that era, it's got pretty good barrel correction. Next up, this one is another one of the MC Mir-20N. Again, you can see it's a pretty neutral, you know, pleasing photo. But let's move on now to the modern lens. And the modern lens here, I mean, I think, you know, it just looks a little bit flatter. I think it has a lot less character. The walls don't quite pop off as much. Yeah, it doesn't have the aberrations, which some people will say, okay, this is definitely the better photo. But to me, you know, still looks a little bit sterile, which, look, in some cases that's what you want for real estate photography, but I think it's a pretty close call between these two in the master bedroom here. But let's pop over to the bathroom. Okay, so here we are. We've got the bathroom shot on the modern lens. I was zoomed into about 26mm on the Nikon DX 16-50 here. And again, all of these shots were quite stopped down to at least f11, even lower in some instances. And again, you know, this looks like it could be taken on a smartphone. Everything's nice and sharp. It is, of course, a very sharp lens. You're not going to be able to see any real chromatic aberrations. These were all shot in RAW as well, of course. So it's a pretty standard photo that, again, is it acceptable? Yes. Is it mind-blowing? Not particularly. Moving on to the MC Mir-20N. Now, this is one of my favorite ones from the MC Mir-20N. And I think that's because it just imparts its own little character. The exposure isn't actually that different, even though this looks so much brighter. The exposures were set basically the same. But I love the way that being on the full frame camera, you have actually got just the tiniest amount of depth of field in the front here. And when you're dealing with a small bathroom like this, I find the full frame just tiny little bit of depth of field. I know it's not the standard in real estate photography. Typically, you know, it's all f16, f22, stop everything down, stack it so that there's no blur whatsoever. But I think in this instance, it does help create depth in a room which it's actually a very small bathroom where there's not much depth. Where you look at the other photo here, this looks quite small, and look, part of that is of course because of the angle. But here in the MC Mir-20N's photo, you've got that a little bit of depth of field. You've got this kind of nice look to it, I think, and it's just a lot more characterful. You know, I want to live in the house that has this bathroom. So I think that is the winner out of these two for me. And lastly, let's see how both of these lenses deal with a little bit of foliage outside. This is the MC Mir-20N, and it's dealt with everything okay. Again, towards the edges of the frame, you are going to see that chromatic aberration, a little bit of a shift there, which admittedly doesn't look fantastic, but at the same time, when you've got a super washed out, pretty ugly sky, that's also not an easy sky to replace, given that it's only poking through these small little areas in the frame there, I don't mind a little bit of blue shifts either. Everything else, pretty standard. I like the way it renders the greens. I probably could have in editing touched down the highlights, but I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of light kind of showing here. And swapping to, again, a slightly different photo, but on the Z30 and the modern lens, again, everything's like super sharp, which is good. You know, some people prefer that. That's great. You know, everything's nice and sharp. There's no aberrations. I do like the colors of all of Nikon's modern mirrorless cameras. I think the colors really shine through on this one, even though the green there is a little bit nuclear. These are all pretty much unedited. The Mir shots I did give a tiny bump in the contrast too, though. So there we have it, guys. Look, obviously the Soviet lenses, the ultra wides, which they make very, very few of. You have the Mir-20N, the Mir-20M, you have the fisheye as well. But overall, the Soviets didn't make too many ultra wides, not much in even the 20mm range, let alone lower than that. You are going to have to play around with those photos once you get them into your editing software to make them look presentable in a real estate kind of setting. But look, I like the character that they give. I think, you know, they render it quite neutrally, and you know, they make your house look a little bit different. And if that's for you, then mixing a couple of photos in from a Soviet lens with some nice crispy, you know, photo rendered photos from a modern mirrorless camera lens, look, you're not going to have a bad time, I don't think. I was successful real estate agent, accepted my photos, and I didn't have to pay a photographer. So at the end of the day, win-win-win, I think. But let me know your comments below. Have you ever tried doing commercial or real estate photography on your old vintage manual focus lenses? I want to know. But until next time, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you then.